The bundle of Des Moines Register newspapers waited in the garage as Johnny Gosch started his Sunday route, the way he had so many mornings before. He was 12 years old enough to feel trusted, young enough to believe the neighborhood was still safe. He rolled his bicycle down the driveway of his West Des Moines home and headed out to deliver papers to customers who expected them on their porches before the day really started. Not far from Johnny's route, another carrier, 14-year-old Eugene John Martin, was delivering his own papers when a man approached him. The stranger asked if Martin knew a boy named Johnny Gosch. It wasn't a casual question about a neighbor. It sounded like someone trying to locate a specific child. Martin pointed in the direction he believed Johnny would be and rode away with the uneasy feeling that he'd just been used to guide a stranger. As the morning moved on, the route began to show small wrongnesses that were easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. Some houses had no paper at all. At least a few deliveries were reported as missing. One customer later told investigators they heard something outside, voices and a car, around the time the paper should have arrived, and when they looked out, the street had gone quiet again. The kind of interruption that lasts seconds, then leaves nothing obvious behind. By late morning, Johnny still hadn't come home. At first, his parents tried to keep their thoughts inside the bounds of ordinary childhood problems. Maybe he'd gotten a flat. Maybe he'd stopped to talk to someone. Maybe he was helping another kid who was running late. But the longer the minutes stretched, the less those explanations fit. Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, and his father, John Gosch, began calling around and then drove the neighborhood, scanning streets, yards, and nearby intersections for a boy on a bike. They drove his route the way he would have ridden it, porch by porch, asking anyone awake if they'd seen him. They checked with other carriers and with customers who had already gotten their papers. They looked for the small things that would make sense of a delay, something left behind, a bike leaned against a fence, a paper bag dropped in a hurry. But nothing settled into a simple answer. When they contacted police, officers began canvassing the area, speaking to witnesses, and collecting descriptions of anything that felt out of place. Martin's account of the man asking for Johnny was an early detail that made the situation feel less like a child who'd wandered off and more like a child who'd been targeted. Other witnesses talked about unfamiliar vehicles in the area and a man who seemed to be watching Paperboys. The descriptions were not consistent enough to lock onto a single suspect, but they were consistent enough to keep the focus on one frightening idea. Someone had been out there looking for kids who were alone. Neighbors joined in. People walked streets and checked ditches. They looked through parks, school grounds, and wooded patches close to the neighborhoods. Flyers went up. The Gosch family waited for a phone call, a message, a mistake by whoever had taken him. Anything that would turn the unknown into a direction. Instead, the case became part of the country's growing awareness of missing children. Johnny's face appeared on posters, on television, and in public campaigns. For many Americans, one of the first missing child faces they remember seeing on a milk carton was Johnny Gosch. The image was meant to help, but it also carried a terrible truth. This wasn't being solved quickly, and the family was being pushed into a kind of public grief that never had an ending. With attention came tips, hundreds of them. Investigators looked at local leads, checked potential suspects, and followed up on information from across the country. Some tips were sincere and detailed. Others were confused, mistaken, or deliberately cruel. The Gosches were told one thing, then another, and sometimes nothing at all. Noreen pushed for updates and pressed officials not to let the case drift into silence. She kept her own records, saved notes from calls, and tracked names and dates, because the official process moved in starts and stops, and she could not afford to let Johnny's disappearance become background noise. As months turned into years, the vacuum created by the lack of answers filled with theories. There were claimed sightings in different states, nearly all impossible to verify. There were rumors of organized exploitation networks and rumors of a lone predator. Law enforcement had to separate what could be documented from what could not, but the public conversation around the case kept drifting toward the larger and the darker, because a simple explanation never arrived to shut the door. In Iowa, the fear around early morning paper routes sharpened when other boys disappeared. In 1984, 13-year-old Eugene Wade Martin vanished in the Des Moines area. In 1986, 12-year-old Mark Allen disappeared. The similarities, young boys, early routes, the idea that a routine job could be used as a hunting ground, made families feel as if the ordinary rules had broken. Investigators considered whether the cases were connected. For the Gosches, it felt like the same kind of loss echoing through the same streets, reinforcing what they already knew in their bones. If Johnny had been taken, he had not been the last child someone would try to reach. Johnny's case remained open, but time changed what open meant. Leads cooled. Witness memories softened at the edges. People moved away. Evidence that might have mattered was either never found or could no longer be recovered. Noreen did not stop. She continued to advocate for missing children and for better coordination between agencies, speaking publicly and demanding that Johnny's name remain visible. The same visibility also brought backlash. Every statement she made was weighed and argued. Every new lead became a public fight between belief and doubt. And in that tension, she lived for decades, trying to keep the focus on the one fact nobody could responsibly dismiss. Her son was still missing. The most controversial claim came in 1997, when Noreen said a man came to her home and told her he was Johnny Gosch. She later described him as an adult, accompanied by another man, and said he spoke with her privately about being taken and held for years. She said she recognized him as her son. No independent verification has ever confirmed that the visit occurred, and law enforcement has not validated the claim. To supporters, it was the closest thing to contact she would ever get. To skeptics, it was another example of how a case like this can pull families toward any thread that feels like it might lead back to the person they lost. What cannot be disputed is what happened at the start and what has remained ever since. A 12-year-old boy left his West Des Moines home to deliver newspapers on September 5, 1982, and he never returned. Witnesses reported suspicious encounters and activity consistent with someone focusing on Paperboys that morning. Despite decades of investigation, public attention, and recurring tips, Johnny Gosch's disappearance has never been solved. For families, unsolved means living with every possibility at once. It means hearing a stranger's footsteps in a hallway and feeling your heart jump, then realizing it's only your own hope making noise. It means watching the years stack up and understanding that the child you're waiting for would be an adult now, with a life that might exist somewhere beyond your reach. And it means holding on to the one thing no investigation can take away: the truth that Johnny was real, loved, and missing. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.